So yeah, someone in my Discord recently just got out of an interview. I think this was for a junior position, and he had a list of all these different questions that basically the interviewer asked him. And I wanted to share that with you all because I think some of these questions are fair game, but other ones are kind of like, I don't know why you'd even ask a junior some of these questions. Even a senior, like some of these questions, like a senior developer doesn't need to know about. So let's kind of walk through here. I was just going to give my opinions on like what should a junior potentially know. I think he has like a year of work experience, so his interview would probably be more in depth than like someone who is fresh out of college or someone who's fresh with no experience. So I think he was applying for a React position. And they asked him a lot of React questions, obviously, but he said the interview was like an hour long and they went in depth a lot into React. So I didn't really organize these. I just took this directly from the chat that he sent me. And he literally wrote down all these questions that they asked him during the interview. So first of all, I guess he was asked about React under the hood. As a junior, I don't even understand why you'd need to know how React works under the hood. And to kind of highlight this question, I believe at the bottom, he was asked what algorithm React uses for reconciliation. So like, I honestly know tons of senior developers, even myself. I don't know what algorithm React uses. Why does it matter? It's a React is a framework or slash library that uses something, and we don't need to know that something to be able to build websites. So a question like this is just like ridiculous, especially for a junior. And you can call me a noob for not really understanding what the algorithm is. But if I've been coding for React for like 7 years and I don't know it, then obviously I don't need to know it. So how browsers work, yeah, obviously this is important. You need to know how a browser, like, when you first go to a URL, it does a GET request that downloads some data, and then it renders that data out somehow. You can get into more detail about like how it parses through the HTML first, and then anytime it sees like a script tag or a link, it downloads those. But honestly, like a lot of this stuff doesn't really matter for a junior. Like, we don't really care how a browser works. We just care about how do we fetch data and how we render out stuff to the DOM. But again, like, I don't know how much in depth they were asking about this. Maybe it's just an open-ended question and they wanted to gauge how much knowledge he kind of had with that. Sorting. I don't know how important sorting was. I know in one of his interviews, he said that he was asked to do like a sort method without using the .sort function in JavaScript, which, let's be honest, like, that's the reason why the .sort function exists, so we can just kind of sort things using the built-in libraries. But I understand like why they quiz on that. It's a very, very like leak code type of thing that you'd ask, like write your own selection sort algorithm. Does it really quiz you with web development? Absolutely not. Hash tables. I mean, I guess it's important, but not really. Like a hash table and a hash map and a hash, like, yeah, it's good to know those like data structures. And most of these are kind of like the same in a sense. But do you really need to know like what a hash table is? Not really. Most languages like Java and JavaScript have some type of object or class that you can use to basically store an object and have a key point to a value for that object. But I guess it's kind of good to understand about this. I think he asked about hashes down here, hashing and security. I would say like these are kind of useful to know, especially map. I mean, like in JavaScript, you use maps all the time. You don't really have this idea of hash maps in JavaScript. You just have maps. A hash map is basically taking a object or a string and like generating a hash from the values so that you can use that as the key in your map. Is that important to know as a junior? Probably not. Have I ever actually used like a hash map? I think I used them in Java, but in JavaScript, I just use maps for everything. State versus props. This one's definitely important to know. Maybe I should like organize these as like important and like less important. Like how browsers work. I guess it depends on how in depth they're expecting an answer there. Sorting, less important. I think his was like a manual insertion sort. Not really important. Hash tables, probably not really important. Hash maps. I think the idea of a map is important to understand in like dictionaries. You're coming from like Python, but I don't know, this stuff. Hash is kind of important. I don't know. You guys can leave in the comments and tell me like how important knowing how to hash something is. I don't think I've ever had to generate a hash often in my work. Props are immutable. Why is it so? What's the reason behind it? So they asked him why properties are immutable. I'm guessing they're saying in React, which technically they're not immutable. I mean, you can pass a property into a subchild and you can change it. Like if you pass an object into a subcomponent and you can just change the properties on that object because they are immutable. So I'm not sure what this question means, but I guess they're asking like what's the benefit of immutability versus mutability? Medium importance. How about that? I'll put that here. I guess it's important to understand why you want immutable code to begin with, but is it important to be able to build out websites? Probably not. Now forget React. If we wanted to change props like mutate regardless of state and parent, how can we do it? Let's say in JavaScript. If we want to change props like mutate regardless of state and parent, how can we do that? I don't know what this question even means. Is that just like passing an object by reference and changing the state? If it is, then I guess that's kind of medium important. Like you need to understand how object references work in JavaScript, and you can pass objects around and arrays around, and those are all by reference. Maybe that's what they're going for. Like if you have I don't know. I think it's kind of important. Use memo, use callback, the reason why it's used. I mean, I guess this is kind of important. Like this is for performance reasons in React, where sometimes React will just keep on re-rendering and recalling your components functions. And if you don't use callbacks and memos, you can see a lot of performance issues when you have components that have a lot of subchildren. Kind of important. I mean, like, again, like you can build an entire full stack application with never touching use memo or use callback. It's good to know it's there and it's good to know why it's there. But in terms of like building an actual UI, probably not that important. I would say sorting is important, but not like writing your own assortment sort. I just came back and read this, but let's see. Lazy loading. Why to use it? What is so beneficial? Where does it load from where to? For a junior, I mean, I guess it's kind of important. Lazy loading is basically a way to prevent the bundle size from being so large when you're building out your React application. So like when you normally build a single page React application, it takes every single dependency and puts into a single JavaScript file, and that JavaScript file can be like almost close to a megabyte or so in size. So you need to find ways to reduce the bundle size so that you can only load the important things for the particular page that you're on. So that's what lazy loading can kind of help with, where you just load a really small subset of your JavaScript to begin with, so that the browser can render the page, and then you lazy load different components in at a later time to kind of, reduce the page load time. Where does it load from? It loads from the server. So like you'll load up the browser, and then as you click on different tabs, you can lazy load more JavaScript down from your web browser or from your web server and load that into the browser. Suspense, how does it handles? I don't think that's important at all. Maybe someone might argue it's important, but for a junior, like suspense, how does it handles? Maybe they're asking about like, how does suspense render out its loading thing? Like this kind of goes hand in hand with lazy loading, I guess. I don't know. It's either less important or medium importance, I think. Lazy load, where's the load? Okay, I don't know why they asked that twice, or it's there twice. Virtual DOM, difference in JavaScript and React virtual DOM. What changes virtual DOM adds up? Now, a lot of these syntheses, I don't know if they're fully exactly what the interview asked. I think these are like little jotted down notes that my subscriber basically had, but I would not ask this for a junior. Like I personally don't even understand the virtual DOM that well. Maybe I'm a noob, but you don't need to know it. I like learning the things that you need to know to get the job done. If you don't need to know this, then there's literally no point to learning it, right? This is an abstraction, and the abstraction helps you get your job done faster. Now, there's sometimes that you need to dive into the abstraction to understand how things work under the hood, but for the most part, I don't think you need to know how a lot of this stuff works under the hood. That's why we have higher level languages. That's why we have abstractions to make us more productive developers. I wouldn't even ask this one. This one seems kind of silly for a junior's question. DOM loading in depth. I don't know what this even means, but again, this is like a lower level abstraction question that probably isn't that important for a junior to know about. How can we prevent re-rendering without use effect, use memo, or use callback? To be honest, I'm not even sure I know the answer to this one. I mean, like, if you have a form, you can use uncontrolled components to prevent it from like re-rendering the form as you type and stuff. But if you can't use effect, I guess you'd have to use references, and those references would need to change the things on your page. But anytime you pull in like React state and you change that state, like stuff's just going to re-render everywhere. So I don't really know what the proper answer to that is. I think understanding somewhat about how React renders and how state changes cause re-renders and how you can cache and prevent those from memos and callbacks might be important for a junior to kind of understand. I'd probably need more context to this question. But I'm pretty sure it's, if you don't want stuff to re-render, like you either need to use some type of external store like Jodi, or you'd have to use some type of like ref so that React doesn't even like listen to when state's changing. I don't know if I answered that right, but anyway. Refs, primary use of ref. So the fact that these two are right next to each other probably is what the answer was. I would say refs are kind of important to understand. It's good to understand refs when you use them, how you can use them, and stuff like that. If we were to sort object keys alphabetically, except we want S string starts with S at first. Oh, I guess that means like sort the entire array, but you want S's to start first because they're special. I mean, that's like a little quiz question about sorting. I think that's kind of important to understand. Why to use map data structures and when? I think that one's important. Maps are very important in JavaScript and coding. I use maps all the time, so it's important to understand like when you want to use a map. Because it can really allow you to write performant algorithms because it's like a lookup table, you know? And this is like a little sort quiz, kind of talked about that. Objects versus maps. I mean, I guess object-oriented programming is kind of important to understand. What is prototyping? What are prototyping? I would say it's kind of important, but not really anymore because now there's ES6 classes and most of this prototype stuff you don't even need to know about. In fact, I would even put this as less important these days. Like, you just need an ES6 class where you can extend other classes, and that's pretty much it. That's just my opinion. Like, prototyping was something done a while back before ES6 classes, where the only way to create object-oriented programming was by using like the .prototype keyword. I mean, I don't know. I guess it's kind of important, but not really. I don't think I ever used the prototype keyword in JavaScript these days. I know you have strings, and the strings have a prototype that has like a bunch of methods on it, and you can extend your string by attaching to the prototype. But like, who actually does that? I don't. Object prototype, same thing. Like, I'll just put that here. I think it's really more important of like OOP, like object prototypes in JavaScript. Again, not that important, but like maybe object-oriented programming in JavaScript is kind of important to understand. Class-based versus functional differences in depth. I think that's in regards to React. I don't think the in-depth thing is important to put because at this point, like, who writes class components anymore? Like, I don't think anyone really writes class-based React components. So I will put it as medium just because, you know, it's important to understand that there are class components and there's functional components and there's some differences between them. But in-depth, I probably wouldn't put the in-depth thing here. When to use when, how one is beneficial over other. That was in regards to this, so I'll put that back. Pure functions in JavaScript, I mean, I guess that's kind of important to know. It's just a function that has no side effects in it. JavaScript engine executes, uses event loop. So whenever I see the word event loop, like, it's good to understand how like asynchronous code works and how sometimes like you'll console log something in a promise and it won't print until a later time. So if they're talking about like promises, async code and promises, that's super important to understand. Now the event loop, like understanding the ordering of the event loop and stuff, probably not important to understand like how the V8 engine event loop is processed. Threading versus multi-threading, like, I think it's less important to know that. I probably wouldn't even ask that. JavaScript uses single thread and achieves async behavior. How other languages achieve the same? Because this is like lower level stuff that like the nitty gritty details of some of these languages and libraries might care about. But honestly, as like a junior developer who just needs to build websites and build APIs, this is not that important. Computer science fundamentals. I would need more like specific examples because some fundamentals of computer science literally make no difference in your day-to-day work. Data structures and algorithms kind of useful, but other than that, like recursion, probably kind of important to understand. Like, I'd put that in medium. But, you know, computer science fundamentals, I'll put it up here just in case, because there are some things that are kind of important to understand. But like if you're talking about the lower level, like how memory is allocated and stuff like that, like that's why we have an abstraction called the garbage collector, which takes care of all that stuff. And as a junior, like we don't need to know about that. Asked about hash tables again, wasn't able to give answers, so ask what comes to your mind when you hear the word hash. I don't know. I still don't think the hash stuff is that important to know. Like it's less important. Hashing and security, that's definitely not important for a web developer who's building out like front end UIs. I don't know why you'd ask about hashing and security. Encryption algorithm, definitely would not ask about that. Like this isn't a security position. Why are we asking about encryption algorithms? Now, I guess it depends on like having some basic understanding of encryption and security is important. Like knowing how these private keys are generated. Like, yeah, it's kind of important in terms of like web development. But again, like the context is like a junior developer. And like how important does a junior developer need to know how the RSA 256 algorithm works? They probably don't need to know that, right? React under the hood. Again, I went years without even knowing a lot about the different custom hooks and hooks that you can use in React, because I just learned the things that are important to getting the job done. So like use layout effect. I probably only used that once in my life. So understanding how React works under the hood, probably not as important. Like you don't need to know how reconciliation works. Like this question, what algorithm React uses for reconciliation? I don't know why you'd ask a junior developer that, because even senior developers don't know and they don't care. So that's I just wanted to go through this list of things that this subscriber sent me. He's been interviewing for like 3 months and he's been getting tons of questions like this. And I think as a junior, especially if you're trying to get into like web development and front end engineering, like you're going to be asked a lot of questions that aren't really that important to the job. And I think some interviewers feel like they need to quiz on stuff that is like super low level and under the hood, which honestly, I don't think a lot of this stuff is important to know as a junior. Like you can learn it along the way and you don't need to know it to get a junior job. What's much more important is like, can you build websites? Can you build UIs? Can you solve some problems? Can you connect a UI to the back end? Can you implement an API? Can you connect that to a database if you're doing like full stack? But even cutting off the back end stuff, like it just kind of sucks because like even me, like some of these answers I give would probably be so wishy-washy, like even me for an interview. Because a lot of this stuff is like we don't really need to think about, like especially like the JavaScript engine and the event loop and the threading versus multi-threading. Like we don't need to think about that stuff because these are all been abstractions. Anyway, I just hope this video was kind of helpful for someone who maybe wanted to get an understanding of how some interviews are kind of played out. I believe this Discord user lives in India, so I don't know if their process is a little bit different from the United States. But this is some of the things that you might get asked in an interview. So if you don't know these things, then depending on where you live and what your previous experiences with interviews have been, you might want to study these. But if it was my opinion, I would probably be kind of frustrated if I left a junior interview and got asked some of these things. But feel free in the comments to leave your suggestions as to like which ones you think were a lot more important than the others. Like again, I'm not trying to say security and encryption algorithms are not important. Again, I'm just saying like as a front-end web developer, they're probably not that important to understand or have to like explain to somebody. Anyway, have a good day. Happy coding.